Liz Monroe stood at the edge of Redwood Heights, a small town perched at the rim of a sprawling valley thick with pines and whispers. The night air charged, alive with the echoes of old arguments and unspoken regrets. She had come here for a brief escape, hoping that the hush of moonlit roads might bring some clarity to her life. But outside the dim glow of the rusted lantern bar, her voice had risen in anger, matching the tense frustration that now brimmed in her chest. "I can't believe you're doing this," Tina had said, her voice trembling with its own quiet fury, her eyes flashing in the flickering neon sign overhead. "You never listen. Liz, you just charge ahead as though consequences don't matter." They had been best friends once, sharing notes in lecture halls and gossip over cheap coffee in the campus library. Yet, tonight, the depth of their bond felt tested beyond measure. Liz recalled the swirl of strobe lights from the bar's half-broken sign, painting Tina's features in a ghostly blue. She had stammered something in reply, her words lost in the haze of hurt pride. She remembered the echo of distant music, the clink of glasses from inside, the smell of cheap whiskey. She remembered Tina's tears, hot and full of sorrow. And then, for reasons she still couldn't articulate, Liz had stormed away, the hush of Redwood Heights pressing in on her mind. Now, perhaps only an hour later, she found herself drifting through an unfamiliar corridor. The hallway was narrow, with walls tinged in pale turquoise that looked sickly under a single flickering light. The air smelled faintly of ozone, the atmosphere heavy with apprehension. Liz had no recollection of how she ended up in this place. The last clear memory she held was the bar's parking lot, where her argument with Tina had devolved into an excruciating scene. She paused, the hallway's silence pressing in around her. With each step, a faint echo reverberated, as though the corridor extended far beyond her line of sight. Part of her wanted to call out for Tina, to mend the shattered pieces of their friendship. Another part of her sensed danger. The corridor felt like a liminal realm, perched between what was real and what was intangible. Ahead, she glimpsed a single door, partially ajar, pale light streaming from within. Something guided her forward, a compulsion she neither fought nor fully understood. As she pushed open the door, she stepped into a dimly lit bedroom. Moonlight washed in through tall windows, illuminating elegant shelves lined with books. There was a battered oak desk near one corner, its surface strewn with papers and archaic volumes. The bed stood at the center, curtains of heavy brocade half drawn around it, creating shadows that seemed to dance in the nocturnal glow. And there, sprawled in restless sleep, lay Rhett Dawson, her literature professor, a man known for his razor-sharp wit and piercing stare. Liz froze, her heart lurching in her chest. Of all the people to encounter in such a surreal place, why would it be him? Only hours before, he had been lecturing at Redwood Heights University about the interplay of myths and cosmic wonders in ancient texts. She had found him maddeningly arrogant, dismissive of her questions, and yet strangely captivating, like the pull of a looming storm that one both fears and admires. Swallowing hard, she approached the bed. The professor's face was partly in shadow, but she recognized that angular jaw, the faint scar along the side of his temple, the strands of dark hair that usually fell across his brow in defiance of combs. Though still lost in dreams, his features looked tense, as though haunted by nightmares. Liz's breath caught. The hush of the bedroom weighed heavy on her. "Tina," she murmured, her voice hushed, as though she might be intruding upon a sacred space. No response. She reached out to brush her fingers across the windowsill, letting moonlight play across her skin. In that moment, a memory surfaced, a sharp jolt, a sensation of unstoppable impact. The crunch of metal, the taste of blood. In the memory's aftershock, her heart nearly burst with dread. She gasped, pressing her palm to her chest. "Professor Dawson," she whispered, stepping closer. Why was she here? Why had she glimpsed that terrifying memory? Her mind churned with questions, only to seize upon the most pressing. Where was her physical self? Was she in a dream? The window beyond revealed the night sky, draped in a tapestry of stars that seemed impossibly bright. as though glimpsed from some vantage beyond the mundane. Liz stepped to the bedside, raising a hand to nudge Rhett Dawson awake. To her shock, her fingertips passed through his shoulder. The air there felt chilled, as though separated from her by a translucent barrier. Panic surged, her eyes widening in disbelief. She glanced around the room, searching for a reflection of herself. There was a tall mirror along one wall, but its glass only reflected the professor's sleeping form. She was invisible, intangible, caught in some intangible space. "No," she breathed, trembling. "This can't be real." For a moment, she wondered if this was an elaborate dream, conjured by her subconscious guilt for the fight with Tina. Yet everything felt too vivid: the soft flutter of the curtains, the faint tang of dust and old paper, the distant hum of something mechanical. No, this was real, in some strange way. She was here, forced to watch as her usually stoic professor tossed in restless slumber. Suddenly, he stirred. His eyelids fluttered, revealing eyes that caught the moonlight with an unsettling gleam. Liz staggered back, uncertain what she was more afraid of, that he might see her, or that he might remain unaware of her presence. But as he sat up, running a hand through his disheveled hair, he did something that shattered her last illusions of comfort. He looked directly at her, or rather, through her, as though her image were a faint blur in the air. Liz's heart pounded. She tried to speak, but the words stuck in her throat. "Professor Dawson," she managed, her voice thin. "Rhett, can you hear me?" She used his first name, an intimacy that felt almost forbidden. Yet no recognition glimmered in his gaze. She was a ghost to him, present and absent in the same breath. Swallowing her panic, Liz glanced around for a clue or explanation. Pages of notes littered the desk, cryptic references to ancient symbols, cosmic anomalies, and references to quantum entanglement theories. She remembered him mentioning something about astral displacements in an elective lecture, half joking about how certain myths connected to overlapping planes of existence. Now, the words seemed to resonate with her predicament. Could she be stuck between worlds, caught in some near-death vantage? Her chest clenched with an emotion she struggled to name: dread, confusion. Perhaps a strange gratitude that at least she wasn't alone. Though Rhett could not see her, she wondered if Tina was safe, if her friend was somehow searching for her right now, or if she was lying on some hospital bed, comatose and near death. Tears stung Liz's eyes at the thought. Suddenly, Rhett stood up and paced across the room. She stepped aside, watching him with a mixture of awe and wariness. He moved with restless energy, as though chasing a silent storm. His expression flickered with impatience. Then, in a low murmur, he said, "Why do I feel as though someone is here?" He glanced in Liz's direction again, eyes narrowing, as if straining to see what logic told him did not exist. Liz inhaled sharply. Had he sensed her presence? Was there a bond, however tenuous, that connected them? The thought sent a surge of electric awareness through her. For all his aloofness and condescension in the lecture hall, in this moment, he felt like her only possible lifeline. She had no idea how to return to her body, if such a possibility still existed. But if Rhett Dawson could perceive even a fragment of her presence, maybe there was hope. Thunder rumbled faintly in the distance, and the air in the room grew heavier, as though the atmosphere itself realized something extraordinary was unfolding. Liz circled around him, careful not to brush too close. In her intangible state, she wasn't sure if she had the power to manifest a more solid form, or if that might vanish if she didn't preserve her energy. She gazed at him, the flicker of the bedroom lamp revealing the angles of his face. For a moment, compassion replaced her earlier fear. She recognized his distress, and she realized that beneath his stern exterior, he was as human and vulnerable as she was. An acute sense of longing welled within her, longing for comfort, for an explanation, for the warmth of a friend. But in that lonely hush, the only one near was a man who remained locked in his own thoughts, occasionally glancing over his shoulder at a presence he could not fully see. Somehow, Liz knew her journey had only begun. and that in this suspended place between reality and rumor, the rules of life and death were overshadowed by something deeper. Whatever had happened on that fateful night, and whatever was drawing her toward Rhett Dawson, it would shape her destiny in ways that her old life had never dared to imagine. So she stood, unseen yet unwilling to fade, resolved to follow him through the labyrinth of cosmic truths that lingered in Redwood Heights. Little did she know, hidden in the veins of the cosmos, her unraveling would also become her salvation. In the days before the strange corridor in the moonlit bedroom, Liz would have described Professor Rhett Dawson as an insufferable genius. Students whispered about him in hushed tones, enthralled by his brilliance yet wary of his cold demeanor. He seldom smiled, and when he did, it was often accompanied by a hint of irony that could unsettle even the most confident of souls. Rumors said he had once been a promising candidate for a major astrophysics research project, only to pivot without warning to the study of obscure literature and archaic mythologies. For Liz, an aspiring writer with a fascination for the paranormal, his lectures were a curious mix of enthrallment and frustration. He spoke of cosmic phenomena as though they were living entities, weaving connections between ancient civilizations and star-bound events that, at times, made her heart race. Yet when she asked pointed questions challenging him on certain interpretations or daring to propose alternative angles, he would often dismiss her inquiries with a condescending arch of his brow. It was in those moments that she felt her temper flare, a clash of intellectual wills that left her both angry and inexplicably drawn to him. Sitting now on the edge of his bed, a ghostly observer to his every gesture, Liz felt those old sparks of conflict flare anew within her, but they mingled with an empathy she had never admitted to before. She saw the faint lines of worry etched into his brow, the tension that lingered in his posture, and she remembered the fragments of her horrifying memory, the sense of a crash, twisted metal, a gaping void that swallowed her consciousness. Surely something tragic had happened to her, but how deeply was Rhett Dawson involved? She watched as he set about gathering notes from the desk, rifling through manuscripts that glowed under the silver sheen of the moon. His hands moved with urgent precision, as though responding to some silent call. Now and then, he would pause, close his eyes, and press his fingers to his temples in deep thought. She yearned to communicate with him, to plead for his help. But each time she reached out, her hand passed through the objects around her, leaving her with a jolt of icy emptiness. When Rhett eventually left his bedroom muttering something about the laboratory under his breath, Liz followed, drifting along like a phantom tethered to him by an invisible thread. They descended a narrow staircase and entered a corridor lined with portraits. Some were ancient, dusty depictions of men in scholars' robes. Others were more modern, showing landscapes of Redwood Heights from eras gone by. A creeping realization stirred in Liz's mind. She didn't recognize this house. It seemed too large, too old-world, to be part of the small town she knew. Yet here it was, tucked away in some hidden corner of Redwood Heights, where Rhett Dawson carried on his peculiar research. At the far end of the corridor was a door reinforced with heavy steel bars. Rhett produced a key from his pocket and unlocked it, stepping into a brightly lit space that hummed with electricity. The contrast was jarring. Here, computers whirred, screens flickered with streams of data, and a large metal device in the corner emitted a soft glow reminiscent of moonlight. Strange glyphs were etched into the floor, forming a circular pattern that thrummed with a subdued energy. Liz felt a chill ripple through her intangible form. Something about this place felt alive, resonating with an otherworldly power that defied logical explanation. On one table, a half-disassembled machine revealed coils of copper wiring, glass tubes, and etched crystals that refracted light into rainbow shards along the walls. Alongside these curiosities were books, massive tomes bound in faded leather, their spines gilded with archaic symbols. She saw references to cosmic gates, astral displacement, and gravitational rifts. "Am I in some sort of secret lab?" Liz whispered, half to herself. Her voice vanished into the air. Rhett busied himself with one of the monitors, scanning lines of code. At length, he exhaled a heavy sigh and spoke to no one in particular. "I can't ignore the signs," he said, voice low. "The readings match the fluctuations I've been tracking for months. There is definitely a dimensional shift happening around Redwood Heights. But why does it feel so personal?" Liz hovered closer, trying to read the data on the screen. It showed waveforms and graphs that seemed to spike at irregular intervals. The words temporal breach and psychic resonance scrolled past. She recalled how in his lectures, he would mention the possibility of consciousness existing on multiple planes simultaneously, a theory scoffed at by most mainstream scientists. At the time, Liz had thought him either too imaginative or too arrogant to see the flaws in his hypotheses. But now, as she stood an impossible specter in his lab, she realized he might have been closer to the truth than anyone had dared to believe. A wave of exhaustion passed through her, and Liz sank into a ghostly crouch, pressing intangible hands to her face. The memory of her fight with Tina replayed in her mind. She saw Tina's tearful gaze, the way the neon bar lights reflected on the wet pavement. She remembered getting into her car, slamming the door, her chest tight with anger and hurt. Then, the memory jumped. There was the sensation of speeding, the squeal of tires, and a bright set of headlights blazing through the darkness. She had tried to swerve, but it was too late. The crunch of metal filled her ears, and everything went black. Her eyes snapped open, realization dawning. She'd been in a horrific accident. That was likely why she was in this intangible state. Perhaps her physical body lay in the hospital somewhere in Redwood Heights, fighting for life. The question was, where did Rhett Dawson fit into all this? She gazed at the complicated machinery around her, the books on astral displacement, and wondered if some cosmic alignment had chosen him as her anchor, an anchor she hadn't asked for, but which might be her only hope of returning. An ache of longing for normalcy twisted inside her. She wanted to be anywhere else, her dorm room, the library, or even finishing that argument with Tina if it meant still being alive in the usual sense. Yet the reality was, she was here, on the edge of life and death, tethered to a man she barely trusted. "Damn it," Rhett muttered, pressing keys on the console. One of the monitors displayed a jagged wave pulsing with erratic frequencies. "The spike is happening again. Another tear is forming." His voice wavered with quiet urgency. "I can almost feel it." Liz felt it too, a faint pulse in the air, as though reality itself were rippling. The ghostly hairs on the back of her neck stood up. Suddenly, the lights in the room flickered, and the circular glyph on the floor glowed with renewed intensity. A low hum reverberated through the walls, rattling the shelves. Rhett stumbled backward, shading his eyes from the brilliant flash that emanated from the metal device in the corner. Liz braced herself, feeling a tug on her intangible form. Then, in a burst of silent explosion, the hum subsided. The overhead lights stabilized, and the device's glow faded. Rhett rushed to the console, scanning the data. He typed commands into the keyboard, brows furrowed in disbelief. "It's gone," he whispered. The tear formed and vanished almost instantaneously. Slowly, he sank into a nearby chair, pinching the bridge of his nose in frustration. "I'm missing something," he murmured. "There must be a catalyst, something that triggers a stable opening. Without it, the phenomenon just flickers in and out of our plane." Liz approached, feeling a rush of empathy. She saw the weight of his research pressing on him like an invisible burden. He needed answers, just as she did. If only she could tell him about her accident, about her strange displacement. Perhaps he'd realize that the very phenomenon he studied might have trapped one of his students in this limbo. She stood behind him, gazing at the swirl of numbers on the screen. Her presence was as silent as the drifting dust motes that glimmered in the halogen light. In the quiet, her thoughts wandered to Tina, to the possibility that her friend was racked with guilt or grief at Liz's disappearance. She wondered if the authorities had found her car, if her parents had been notified. The swirl of worry threatened to engulf her, but she forced herself to stay focused. Nothing else mattered if she couldn't find a way back. For a long while, Rhett sat in contemplation. The lab's machinery hummed softly, as though exhausted by the recent burst of energy. Then, with a determined set to his jaw, he rose from the chair, took a small notebook from his pocket, and began scribbling furiously. Liz watched over his shoulder, catching phrases like ley lines, eclipse synergy, and soul tether. She felt a slight tremor course through her ghostly body. It was as if his words resonated with her condition, stirring the intangible chords that linked her to this reality. Once he finished, Rhett closed the notebook with a snap. "I need to cross-reference these readings with the Redwood archives," he said to himself, heading toward the door. "If the cosmic alignment is as I suspect, we may only have a narrow window to harness it." He paused, looking back at the swirling glyph on the floor. A tinge of determination, mingled with unease, flickered in his eyes. Then he strode out, locking the heavy door behind him. Liz drifted after him, compelled by that invisible tether. She longed to scream, to tear down the walls between them with her bare hands. But all she could do was float in his wake, like a silent echo trailing a mind that churned with wonders beyond ordinary comprehension. Together, they ascended to the main level of the house. Rhett paused only to grab his coat and car keys from a hook by the foyer. Moments later, he stepped outside into the crisp night air. The faint outline of Redwood Heights spread before them. Streetlights glimmered in the distance, marking a world Liz recognized yet felt utterly separated from. She caught a glimpse of his reflection in the side mirror, of his old black sedan. A determined scowl marred his features, but a flicker of doubt crept into his eyes as he glanced at the empty passenger seat. "Without warning," he murmured, "I swear I can feel you, whoever you are." The words lingered in the hush of the night. Liz's heart constricted, a swirl of relief and yearning. He could sense her, at least in some small way. That had to be a sign she wasn't entirely lost. She slipped into the passenger seat, though she passed right through the door and settled, as best she could, beside him. The engine roared to life, headlights cutting a path through the gloom. As they sped into the night, Redwood Heights stretched out like a tapestry of old secrets and hidden wonders. Liz gazed at the passing houses, the silent streets, the towering pines standing as sentinels on the horizon. She never thought she would be so grateful simply to see her town again, even from a vantage as strange and untethered as this. Unnoticed by Rhett, she whispered a promise to herself. "I will find a way back. I have to." And if Rhett Dawson was the only one who could help her, then she would cling to his every step, determined to unravel the cosmic puzzle that bound their fates together. For though the road ahead seemed fraught with danger and the unknown, a faint glimmer of hope now pulsed in her chest. In that moment, as the old sedan carried them toward the Redwood archives, Liz closed her eyes and let the engine's vibrations lull her into a state of resolve. If being linked to Rhett was her lifeline, she would embrace it even if it meant confronting deeper shadows than she'd ever imagined. Her body might be absent, but her spirit was fierce, and she would fight for the chance to live again. Unbeknownst to her, high in the starlit sky, a subtle distortion shimmered, a testament to the fractures forming between the realms. And though neither Liz nor Rhett fully understood it yet, their paths were now irrevocably intertwined, set on a course that would shape not just their destinies, but perhaps the fate of Redwood Heights itself. The Redwood Archives sat at the far end of the university campus, housed in a grand, ivy-covered building that seemed to loom out of another century. Most students at Redwood Heights University never bothered to explore its labyrinthine corridors, reserved as they were for dusty manuscripts and archaic research. But for Rhett Dawson, it was a second home, a sanctuary, where cosmic theories intersected with forgotten lore. Liz followed closely as he parked in a quiet lot under flickering lampposts. The night was still, a hush, broken only by the soft rustling of tree branches overhead. She drifted out of the car, her intangible footsteps making no sound on the cracked asphalt. A pang shot through her as she noticed the stark emptiness around them. This was her campus, a place of familiarity, and yet she felt like a phantom intruder wandering its darkened precincts. Rhett pulled open the heavy doors of the archives. The foyer smelled of old paper and cedar polish, a cozy combination that evoked libraries of antiquity. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, illuminating shelves upon shelves of books and documents. An elderly clerk sat at a desk near the entrance, half dozing, until Rhett's firm footsteps roused him from his drowsy vigil. Evening. Professor Dawson, the clerk said, adjusting his spectacles. He seemed only mildly curious about Rhett's late-night visit, as though unusual hours were nothing new for the eccentric academic. Rhett offered a polite nod. Evening, Mr. Fraser. I just need to check some references in the restricted section. I'll lock up when I leave. Mr. Fraser yawned, waving him through. Just be sure to turn off the lights when you finish, he muttered, before settling back into his chair. Liz watched the exchange, feeling a sting of nostalgia for simpler times, those days when she might have crammed for a test in the library, or argued with Tina over which cafe served the best latte. The corridor leading deeper into the archives felt endless, the hush thick with solemnity. Rhett passed row after row of shelves, each containing volumes that probably hadn't been touched in decades. He stopped at a locked gate partitioning off a far section labeled Restricted. Producing a ring of keys from his coat pocket, he unlocked the gate and stepped through, Liz following like a silent shadow. The restricted section was dimly lit, with only a few strategically placed lamps casting warm pools of light. Here, the shelves were taller, crammed with ancient tomes bound in faded leather, their spines cracked and corners worn by time. Rhett moved with practiced efficiency, scanning for specific call numbers. Liz felt her curiosity rise as she drifted beside him, reading titles in gilded lettering, Cosmology of the Ancients, treatises on astral plane convergence, The Veil of Worlds. Each title seemed to hint at the precarious space she now inhabited. Perhaps, within these pages, lay the key to her predicament. Finally, Rhett found a large, ornate tome bound with iron clasps. Its cover bore an emblem that resembled an eclipse encircled by flames. He carried it to a nearby reading table, setting it down with reverent care. The table's surface was wide enough for multiple volumes, but tonight, it would serve as a stage for one of Redwood Heights' most clandestine texts. Liz hovered behind him, watching as he carefully opened the clasps. The pages inside were made of thick parchment, covered in swirling script that danced between Latin, Greek, and an older language Liz couldn't recognize. Rhett turned the pages slowly, scanning each with the professor's practiced eye. He paused at a section adorned with intricate diagrams, a celestial map of sorts, with lines of force arching around a silhouette of the full moon. Strange runes and symbols marked key intersections. Liz leaned closer, trying to glean meaning from the text. One phrase caught her eye, etched in bold ink, Conjunctio lunaris, accompanied by an image of two silhouettes merging under the glow of moonlight. A lunar convergence, Rhett muttered, tracing the diagram with his finger. But not merely an eclipse, something deeper, a synergy of energies that overlaps realms. He flipped to the next page, revealing an illustration of a figure standing at a crossroads, half of their body transparent and wreathed in spectral light. Liz felt her pulse, if she even had one quicken at the similarity to her own predicament. The text next to the illustration mentioned lost souls caught between the earthly coil and cosmic fabric. Rhett exhaled, a mix of excitement and dread etched in his features. The next lunar event is only days away, he mused. If the dimensional rifts are aligned with this conjunctio lunaris, it could potentially open a gateway large enough for a full crossing, either from one realm to another or back again. Liz's heart soared. This had to be it, a chance to return to her body, to reconcile with Tina, to live once more. But that excitement was tempered by caution. For all his intelligence, Rhett was venturing into ancient, possibly dangerous territory. If something went wrong, the rift could trap her forever or unleash horrors beyond imagination. As Rhett turned more pages, the text described rituals involving crystals, incantations, and precise astronomical timings. There were references to guardian spirits, watchers at the threshold, and the necessity of a living anchor to guide a stranded soul home. Liz's gaze snapped to Rhett's profile. A living anchor, was that what he was to her? The notion felt both comforting and terrifying, binding them together by cosmic design or cruel fate. Suddenly, a distant clatter echoed through the restricted section. Rhett tensed, lifting his head. Liz spun around, her eyes scanning the gloom for the source of the noise. From the far end of the shelves came a flicker of movement, a brief silhouette that darted behind a stack of old crates. "Who's there?" Rhett called, his voice echoing in the hushed space. No answer came. A moment passed, heavy with anticipation. Then, with a determined set of his jaw, Rhett walked toward the sound, leaving the tome open on the table. Liz followed, her intangible form passing effortlessly through the rows of shelves. They reached the far end, where archival boxes piled up haphazardly. A narrow space between them showed signs of recent disturbance footprints in the thin layer of dust, a toppled stack of books. Yet the intruder seemed to have vanished. Rhett frowned. Students aren't allowed back here without clearance. He scanned the shadows for any sign of movement. Perhaps it was just Mr. Fraser or a night janitor. But Liz felt a prickling sense of unease. Something about that darting silhouette seemed off too quick, too furtive. A wave of cold energy coursed through her as she remembered the cosmic rifts and the possibility that Redwood Heights was no longer the sole domain of ordinary mortals. Could something else have slipped through? They waited a moment longer, but no further sounds disturbed the stillness. At length, Rhett returned to the reading table and resumed his study of the tome. Liz stayed on alert, scanning the darkness. The faint glow of the overhead lamps lent the scene an almost surreal air, surrounded by ancient knowledge, with a strange presence possibly lurking in the archives. Liz felt the stakes rising. Rhett read aloud in a hushed whisper. One must seek the convergence at the hour of greatest lunar potency, ensuring the synergy between the anchor and the lost spirit remains unbroken. Beware the watchers who prey on souls adrift, for they relish the harvest of ephemeral essence. He paused, swallowing hard. If the watchers find a lost soul before it can be guided back, the tether is severed, and the soul is consumed. Liz trembled. The text was painting a grim scenario beings that feasted on spirits like hers. Her intangible form felt suddenly more vulnerable, like a candle flickering in the wind. She glanced around the silent shelves, imagining shapes skulking between the books, hungry for her presence. It was terrifying to think that her quest to return to life wasn't just a challenge, it might be a race against malevolent forces. Rhett shut the tome, realization dawning in his eyes. So that's it, he murmured. The watchers could be behind the fluctuations, using the rifts to snare unsuspecting souls. But there has to be a way to ward them off, to stabilize the crossing. He grabbed a small notebook from his pocket and began scribbling down references to pages, formulas, and times. Liz hovered close, reading phrases like astral wards, amulet of convergence, and blood moon incantation. The mention of an amulet made her recall a fleeting glimpse from the corridor in his house, an old wooden box on a shelf near his desk. Could that box contain something crucial to the ritual? Her thoughts whirled, each new piece of information weaving a tapestry of cosmic intrigue. They spent hours in the archives, Rhett cross-referencing other volumes, digging into footnotes, his fervor fueled by an unrelenting need for answers. At times, he spoke to himself in a near whisper. I can't shake the feeling that there's someone here, someone calling out. Liz watched him with a surge of gratitude and something resembling affection. His senses were attuned to her presence, even if he couldn't fully see or hear her. In the quiet glow of the library lamps, he seemed less the arrogant professor and more a man carrying a heavy burden, determined to right some cosmic wrong. Eventually, he closed the last book with a weary sigh. The overhead lights had dimmed slightly, an automatic setting for after hours. Rhett's eyes were bloodshot from strain, but a spark of resolution remained. He stood, gathering his notes. The next full moon is in 3 nights, he said softly. If I can prepare the wards by then, and if I can locate the nexus point of the rift. He trailed off, lips pressed thin, I have to try. Liz wanted to reassure him, to tell him she was grateful, that she believed in him. But all she could do was linger by his side, a silent witness to his growing resolve. Together, they left the restricted section, locking it behind them. The archives felt like a sleeping colossus, content now that its secrets had been borrowed for a time. On their way out, Mr. Fraser had already dozed off again. Rhett left a note on the desk, reminding the clerk he'd locked the restricted gate. Then he and Liz ventured back into the night. The air was even chillier now, with a faint mist creeping along the ground. Liz marveled that her intangible form still felt the temperature, albeit faintly. As they reached the car, Rhett paused. He tilted his head as though listening to something, a faint echo in the darkness. "I swear," he said, voice trembling ever so slightly, "I'm not alone." A moment of stillness passed, the campus silent except for the soft susurration of wind through the pines. Liz stood before him, lifting a hand in a futile attempt to touch his cheek. She nearly wept when it slipped through him like a ripple of air. The moment stretched, filled with an unspoken yearning. Then Rhett shook his head, slipping into the driver's seat. Liz followed, taking her place beside him as he started the engine. The path ahead seemed fraught with peril, but they had a plan at least. Fragments of one, the Watchers, the cosmic rifts, the looming lunar event, it all converged into a single ticking clock, counting down the hours until the next full moon. They pulled out of the lot, the university buildings receding behind them, like silent watchers of their own. In Liz's mind, a steady mantra echoed, "Hold on, stay with him, find a way back." She clung to that determination, even as fatigue gnawed at her ethereal consciousness. Could a spirit tire? Apparently so, for she felt her awareness flicker like a fading light. Yet as Redwood Heights' quiet streets guided them back toward Rhett's mysterious home, Liz forced herself to remain alert. She sensed that events were moving faster than either of them realized. Shadows were stirring, watchers prowling, and though Rhett Dawson was brilliant, he was only human. Would he be strong enough to face whatever lay ahead? A glow on the horizon hinted at the approaching dawn, the sky softening from inky black to muted gray. Liz found herself wondering if the rising sun would banish her or grant her renewed vigor. She closed her eyes, concentrating on her presence, on her desire to stay tethered. When she opened them again, Rhett's house stood before them, looking more ominous in the pre-dawn light than it had the night before. He parked and rushed inside, Liz in tow. The corridor greeted them with the same hushed anticipation. She caught sight of the bedroom, where she'd first appeared, moonlight replaced now by the gentle hues of sunrise. Rhett headed for his lab without a moment's pause, arms full of books and notes. Liz followed, prepared to watch him work, to glean every clue she could from the puzzle of cosmic wonders. In that silent companionship, one visible, one unseen, they braced themselves for the battle to come. And though neither spoke a word, each sensed that in 3 nights' time, Redwood Heights would witness a spectacle woven by forces that defied reason. The Watchers would be stirring, and the rift would open. The question was whether Liz's tenuous tether to life would withstand the storm, or whether she would vanish into the void forever. Yet as Liz hovered by Rhett's side, she could not help but feel a surge of hope. Something about his quiet determination reassured her, telling her that if anyone could bend the cosmic rules, it was this infuriating, brilliant man. And so she stayed, a silent specter. Her heart, if a spirit could have a heart, warmed by the faintest flicker of faith in a future where she could once again breathe, laugh, and perhaps even share a moment of genuine understanding with the man who had unwittingly become her salvation. Morning light flooded through the tall windows of Rhett Dawson's study, revealing dust motes dancing in the golden rays. Liz had expected the sun to banish her intangible form, but she remained, albeit drained. Exhaustion lingered in her being, as though her spirit had weight despite its lack of physical substance. Rhett set down his armload of books on the wide mahogany desk. Outside, birds chirped in the pines that surrounded his isolated property. The day carried a deceptive sense of normalcy, belying the cosmic drama unfolding beneath the surface. Without pause, Rhett began flipping through the texts, cross-referencing the notes he'd taken from the archives. Complex diagrams of lunar phases and sketches of arcane symbols sprawled across loose sheets of paper. Liz stood behind him, reading over his shoulder. She couldn't help but feel a swell of admiration for his relentless focus. Despite the supernatural weight pressing in on them, his resolve remained unshaken. Soon, he removed a key from his pocket, opened a locked drawer in his desk, and took out a small wooden box. Liz leaned forward, eager to see what lay inside. With careful hands, Rhett lifted the lid and revealed an antique amulet. It was a circular pendant of tarnished silver, etched with cryptic runes around a pale gemstone at its center. The gem shimmered with a faint luminescence, as though alive with trapped starlight. Rhett turned it over in his palm. "The amulet of Yulon," he murmured, eyes narrowed with concentration. If the texts are correct, this should help stabilize the tether between planes. It's said to resonate with the natural frequencies of both the physical and astral realms. A spark of recognition flickered through Liz. She recalled a mention of such an artifact in one of the volumes they'd consulted, the notion that it could serve as a beacon, guiding lost spirits back to their bodies. Excitement trembled through her, mingled with dread. Would it truly work? Rhett closed his fingers around the amulet, as though drawing comfort from it. Then he rose, heading to the lab where his strange machinery waited. Liz followed, feeling a subtle tug at the edge of her awareness. A pressure built in the air, faint but persistent. The Watchers, she thought with a shiver. They're near. Once inside the lab, Rhett placed the amulet on a table alongside a nest of wires, coils, and crystals. He began tinkering, muttering calculations under his breath. Occasionally, he paused to consult a battered notebook, cross-checking the glyph inscribed on the floor. Liz hovered close, absorbing what she could as methodical approach. Time blurred as he worked, each passing hour marked by the shifting sunlight through the windows. Afternoon arrived, and Rhett finally straightened, wiping sweat from his brow. "That should do for now," he said, stepping back to examine the apparatus he'd assembled. It was an intricate device, a circular frame of metal rods holding the amulet at its core, each rod etched with runes reminiscent of those from the ancient tomes. Crystals dangled from slender wires, catching the light in prismatic flares. In the heart of it all, the pale gemstone in the amulet pulsed softly, as though responding to some unseen rhythm. "Tonight, I'll test it," Rhett decided aloud. "There's a minor lunar alignment that might serve as a dress rehearsal before the main event in a few days." He glanced around the room, a hint of skepticism lurking in his gaze. "I only hope I'm not too late." Liz yearned to reassure him. She tried to place her intangible hand on his shoulder, but it passed through without substance. Still, she willed her gratitude in his direction, hoping some part of him might sense it. Before he could continue, a sudden crash echoed from the corridor just beyond the lab. Rhett tensed, spinning toward the door. Liz felt her spirit quiver. Something was here, and the air had grown colder in an instant. They rushed into the hallway to find a vase shattered on the floor, shards of porcelain scattered like broken teeth. A breeze, impossibly cold, swept past them. Rhett shivered. Liz felt it too, an arctic chill that gnawed at her very essence. From the shadows emerged a shape, indistinct at first, like a patch of swirling darkness. Then it coalesced into a vaguely humanoid form, its eyes two pinpoints of eerie luminescence. Liz's breath caught in her throat. She could feel its hunger, a palpable force reaching out to snatch her from the air. Rhett's face blanched with shock, but he stood firm. His voice shook only slightly when he spoke. "You're not supposed to be here," the entity hissed, a sound like wind scouring across ice. Liz instinctively withdrew, terror blooming in her chest. This was a Watcher, one of the malevolent beings the ancient texts had warned about. And it was here, in Rhett's home, searching for its prey. The Watcher glided forward, leaving traces of frost on the wooden floor. Rhett moved, placing himself between it and the lab. Liz watched with growing horror. She knew it sought her spirit, hungering for the energy she possessed. if it got past Rhett. She doubted she could evade it for long, summoning a surge of courage. Rhett raised a hand and murmured words Liz couldn't quite catch, some incantation gleaned from the texts. The glyph on the lab's floor flickered in response. For a moment, the watcher hissed again, recoiling as though struck. But the respite was brief. The entity's eyes flared, and a tendril of darkness lashed out, striking Rhett's arm. He staggered back, clutching at his sleeve where a rime of frost spread across the fabric. Pain contorted his features, yet he stood his ground, jaw clenched in defiance. Liz's heart pounded, or at least it felt like it did. She refused to let this creature devour her spirit. She had to help Rhett somehow. She closed her eyes, focusing on every ounce of her will. She imagined pushing her essence outward, as if forging a barrier of light. To her astonishment, a faint glow surrounded her, shimmering with the same hue as the amulet's gemstone. The watcher swiveled its gaze to her, hissing with renewed malice. It could sense her attempt, but it hesitated, perhaps uncertain about the sudden surge of energy. That hesitation gave Rhett the opening he needed. He reached into his pocket, retrieving a small vial of shimmering liquid, something he must have prepared for just this scenario. "Begone," he commanded, tossing the contents of the vial toward the watcher. The liquid erupted into silvery sparks upon contact, wreathing the entity in cascading flashes of light. The watcher shrieked, its form dissolving into writhing shadows. Within moments, it had vanished, leaving only an icy patch on the floor where it had stood. Rhett sagged against the wall, breathing heavily. His arm, still frosted over, trembled with cold. Liz rushed to his side. Even though she couldn't offer physical support, she felt an overwhelming gratitude that he had stood between her and the watcher, risking himself to protect her ephemeral existence. For a few minutes, Rhett simply caught his breath, his expression a mix of horror and fierce determination. Then, blinking hard, he pushed away from the wall. "We need stronger wards," he muttered, his breath visible in the lingering chill. "They've noticed the dimensional disturbance. They know something or someone is here." Liz drifted close, wanting to convey her gratitude. If not for Rhett's quick thinking, she might have been consumed by that monstrous entity. She stared at him, wondering if he could feel the warmth of her silent admiration amid the lingering cold. Summoning what strength remained, Rhett stumbled back into the lab and shut the door behind him. He flicked on a series of switches along the wall. Sparks danced across the metallic frame at the center of the room, enveloping the amulet in an electric aura. Liz hovered near it, sensing a resonant hum that echoed through her very core. "This," Rhett said, gesturing to the apparatus, "should help mask our presence from them, at least temporarily. It might interfere with their ability to track the astral frequency." He winced, rubbing at the frostbitten skin beneath his torn sleeve. "But we can't rely on this alone. We have to complete the ritual at the lunar convergence. That's our best shot." Liz nodded, even though he couldn't see her. Adrenaline coursed through her translucent veins. If such a thing existed, she recalled the Watcher's ominous description in the ancient texts, malevolent sentinels lurking in the cracks between realities, drawn to the taste of a wandering soul. The day's terror made it clear their threat was no mere myth. Despite the danger, Rhett persisted. He adjusted the wards in the lab, consulting a battered grimoire for guidance. Hours slipped by as he fortified the circle of glyphs, placing crystal rods in precise formations. The sunlight outside waned, sliding into a blood-streaked sunset that painted the pines in shades of crimson and gold. As darkness crept over Redwood Heights, Liz grew more uneasy. Nighttime seemed to invite the Watchers, giving them freer rein to slip through the thinning veil. She drifted to a window, staring out at the lonely road and dense woodland. Shadows lengthened beneath the trees, shapes that could have been swaying branches or something far more sinister. Behind her, Rhett lit a row of candles, chanting under his breath. The flickering flames cast dancing patterns on the walls, lending the lab a haunted glow. Liz marveled that she could see the light, feel the warmth, even though she was insubstantial. Perhaps her tether to this plane granted her some measure of human sensation. At last, Rhett sank into a chair, fatigue written in the lines of his face. "That's all I can do for now," he murmured. "The Watchers will likely return if they sense an opportunity. We have to hold them off until the full moon." He raked a hand through his hair, his gaze searching the empty air. I can still sense you," he said quietly, voice trembling with a strange mix of fear and comfort. "Please, hang on, whoever you are. I'm trying my best to help." Liz's heart twisted. She stepped closer, wishing she could speak directly to him, to reassure him he wasn't alone in this. But all she could manage was to hover near his chair, a silent presence offering what solace she could. And in that hush, she realized how profoundly her feelings for him had changed. He was no longer the distant, insufferable professor she'd once resented. Instead, he had become her champion, risking his life to protect a fragile soul he could barely perceive. With night fully upon them, Rhett retired to his room, though not without setting a protective ward at the lab's entrance. Liz followed, aware that her intangible state somehow resisted sleep. Yet she still experienced exhaustion and ache in her consciousness that craved rest. She drifted into the bedroom where she had first found him. Moonlight spilled across the bed, creating patterns on the sheets. Rhett stood by the window, gazing up at the sky. Clouds drifted across the moon, cloaking its face intermittently. He sighed, then turned away, collapsing onto the bed in a weary sprawl. Within moments, exhaustion claimed him, and his breathing steadied into the rhythm of sleep. Liz lingered by the window, peering into the moonlit yard. In the distance, beyond the fence, pine trees swayed. The Watchers were out there somewhere, lurking in the veil of night. She shuddered, recalling the chill of their presence. But as she glanced back at Rhett's slumbering form, a fierce resolve bubbled within her. She wouldn't cower before these monsters. Not when she had a chance, no matter how slim, to reclaim her life. Closing her eyes, she willed herself to rest, to gather strength in whatever manner a spirit could. The night stretched on, silent except for the soft murmur of wind and Rhett's even breaths. And though sleep never truly claimed her, Liz felt her mind drift, lulled by the knowledge that she was not alone in this fight. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, fresh dangers. The Watchers had shown themselves, and they would not relent easily. But she and Rhett Dawson had come this far, bound by a cosmic tether neither had chosen. Together, they would face the encroaching darkness, and Liz vowed, as the moon sailed above the drifting clouds, that she would hold on to hope, no matter how terrifying the road ahead became. Meanwhile, across town, a very different drama was unfolding. Tina Davis, racked with guilt and worry, paced the corridors of Redwood Heights General Hospital. Her eyes were rimmed red from sleepless nights and frantic tears. She couldn't shake the memory of her last conversation with Liz, a heated argument that had ended in bitterness. That argument had replayed in Tina's mind over and over since. The police found Liz's car overturned in a ditch just off the winding back road near the bar. Though the paramedics had rushed Liz's unconscious form to the hospital, the doctors were perplexed by her condition. She lay comatose, vital signs stable but unresponsive. Tests revealed no significant brain injury, no medical explanation for her persistent coma. Yet she neither woke nor deteriorated. She simply lingered in a state that baffled even the most experienced physicians. Tina's heart clenched at the sight of her friend, hooked up to monitors, motionless beneath crisp white sheets. In a whisper, Tina would apologize 1,000 times, begging Liz to come back, to let them fix whatever had torn them apart that night. But Liz gave no sign of hearing. Day after day, her condition remained unchanged. Now, as Tina huddled in a corner of the waiting area, the overhead television droned with news of an upcoming lunar eclipse, a rare event slated to take place in 3 days. Tina barely registered the announcement. Her mind was on the cryptic words of an older nurse who had discreetly pulled her aside that morning. The nurse, who insisted on anonymity, claimed to have seen patients in similar unexplainable comas before patients who recovered under circumstances that defied science. She whispered about spiritual entanglements and unresolved energies. Tina, Though skeptical, clung to any thread of hope. The nurse's theories echoed rumors Tina had heard among some of the more superstitious townsfolk. Redwood Heights was rumored to stand on peculiar ley lines, places where the boundaries between worlds were said to be thinner. Tina had always dismissed such tales as folklore, but now, with Liz trapped in an inexplicable coma, she found herself unable to shake the nagging sense that something beyond the realm of science was at play. The nurse had offered a piece of advice: seek out someone who understands the old ways. Tina immediately thought of Rhett Dawson, the enigmatic professor whose name came up whenever arcane phenomena were discussed on campus. Although Liz had griped about his arrogance and cryptic lectures, he was reputed to know more about Redwood Heights' hidden lore than anyone else. Tina decided to find him, if only to quell the gnawing fear that something intangible held Liz captive. But locating Rhett Dawson proved more challenging than she expected. Over the past 2 days, he had not responded to email or phone calls. His office door at the university remained locked. No one had seen him on campus, and his mailbox overflowed with uncollected letters. Tina asked around, but most staff offered only shrugs and muttered speculations about him being on some research trip. Tina refused to give up. That evening, after visiting hours ended, she left the hospital, determination burning in her eyes. The setting sun painted the sky in watercolor hues of pink and orange, a deceptive beauty that did nothing to ease her worry. She climbed into her old sedan and headed for Redwood Heights University. If she couldn't find him at his office, maybe the campus archives where rumor had it he spent his nights would hold a clue. She arrived just as the lights in the main buildings began to flicker off. The campus, always quiet in the late evenings, felt deserted. Tina walked briskly across the manicured lawns, the hush amplifying her anxious thoughts. She tried the archives' main entrance, but the doors were locked. Undeterred, she circled around to a side door, rattling the handle. No luck. A single lamp shone through a window, illuminating row after row of ancient tomes. "Professor Dawson," Tina called softly, pressing her palm to the glass. "Are you in there?" Her voice echoed in the stillness, unanswered. She sighed, stepping back. It seemed Rhett Dawson was nowhere to be found. But as she made her way back to the parking lot, she spotted an old caretaker with a ring of keys at his waist. "Excuse me," she ventured, hurrying over. "I'm looking for Professor Dawson. Have you seen him? It's urgent." The caretaker blinked, adjusting his cap. "Dawson. Not since last night, miss. He came around for some books in the restricted section. Left around dawn. Seemed in a mighty hurry." Tina's pulse quickened. "Do you know where he might have gone?" "He didn't say." The caretaker shrugged. "But I know he has an old house deeper in the pine woods, off North Creek Road. Strange place for a professor, if you ask me." Tina pressed him for directions, relief flooding her. Finally, a lead. She thanked him profusely and raced back to her car. Night settled in by the time she navigated the winding roads leading north of Redwood Heights. Tall pines flanked the route, their silhouettes ominous in the darkness. The caretaker's directions led her to a narrow gravel drive, nearly swallowed by dense undergrowth. She turned in, her headlights slicing through a tangle of branches. After a few minutes of slow, nerve-wracking progress, Tina glimpsed a house large, old, and faintly lit from within. Her heart pounded. This had to be Rhett Dawson's place. She parked near a small clearing, stepping out into the chill night air. Crickets chorused, and the pines whispered overhead, adding to the sense of foreboding. She made her way to the front door. No doorbell. She rapped firmly with her knuckles, calling out, "Professor Dawson, it's Tina Davis. I need your help." Silence. Tina tried again, louder this time. Still nothing. Frustration welled up. She tested the door handle locked. Her eyes roamed over the dark windows, searching for any sign of movement. He had to be here. She refused to believe she'd come all this way for nothing. Suddenly, a soft glow appeared in an upstairs window, flickering as if someone held a candle or flashlight. Tina's spirits soared. "Professor," she called, stepping back to crane her neck. The light bobbed, then disappeared. A moment later, she heard footsteps inside, muffled yet distinct. A lock clicked, and the front door creaked open. Tina found herself face to face with Rhett Dawson. He looked disheveled, dark circles under his eyes, and wore a shirt smeared with what looked like ash or soot. Surprise flashed in his features, followed by guarded suspicion. "You're Liz's friend," he said. "Tina Davis, right?" His voice was hoarse, as though from lack of sleep. Tina nodded, relief washing over her. "Yes, I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm desperate. Liz is in the hospital, in a coma. The doctors," his face tightened at Liz's name, confirming that her condition was no surprise to him. "How did you find me?" he asked, stepping aside to let her in. "The caretaker at the archives mentioned your house. Please, Professor, we need your help. The doctors have no idea what's going on with Liz. I was told you might understand something about Redwood Heights' unusual energies." Rhett exhaled, glancing around the dim corridor as though debating how much to say. At length, he gestured for her to follow him. "All right, come in quickly." Tina stepped inside. The door closed behind her with a firm thud. At once, she felt a curious static in the air, as though she'd crossed an invisible threshold. The corridor smelled of old paper and candle wax. A single lamp cast trembling shadows on the walls. Rhett led her to a small sitting room near the stairwell. Tina's gaze flicked over the worn furnishings, the stacks of books, the scribbled notes pinned to the walls, diagrams of constellations, phases of the moon, and strange symbols that made her uneasy. She thought of the nurse's words, "Redwood Heights stands on peculiar ley lines." "I know about Liz's coma," Rhett said, settling into a chair that groaned under his weight. He ran a hand through his unruly hair. "I've been working on a solution." Tina's eyes widened. "You do? So you believe something supernatural is causing it?" He hesitated, searching her face. "You might not believe me if I told you everything. But yes, her condition isn't purely medical. She's trapped between realms, a state that defies conventional explanation." Tina swallowed hard, recalling the nurse's cryptic hints. "Trapped between realms, you mean?" Her spirit. Rhett nodded. "Exactly. And there's more. Malevolent forces are at play, entities that prey on souls caught in limbo. If we don't act soon within the next 3 nights, Liz could be lost forever." Tina's stomach churned. She pressed a hand to her mouth, fighting back tears. 3 nights? But how? The doctors said her vital signs are stable. They can't measure the threat from the Watchers. Rhett interrupted, his voice grim. "I've encountered one already. It nearly broke through here. They're aware of Liz's spirit hovering in limbo, and they're hungry." Tina shuddered. The weight of his words settled like a cold stone in her chest. Memories of Liz's laughter, her bright smile, stabbed at Tina's heart. She couldn't lose her friend this way. "So, what do we do?" she managed, voice trembling. "Tell me, Professor, how do we save her?" Rhett rubbed his temples. "I'm preparing a ritual that coincides with the full moon the same night as a partial lunar eclipse. We'll need a place where the barriers between realms are thinnest, and an artifact that can anchor Liz's spirit to her body. With the right incantations and timing, I believe we can guide her back." Tina exhaled a shaky breath, relief and apprehension mingling. "Then, let's do it. Whatever it takes." Rhett nodded, respect flickering in his eyes. "I was planning to handle this alone, but help might be beneficial. Our margin for error is slim. One misstep, and we could lose her to the Watchers or worse." Tina swallowed. The mention of Watchers made her skin crawl. "Tell me what you need." Over the next hour, Rhett outlined the plan in hushed tones. They would perform the ritual at the Redwood Grove, a clearing near the heart of the forest rumored to be a powerful nexus of ley lines. The Watchers could attempt to breach the protective wards, so they would need multiple layers of defense. Tina found herself struggling to grasp it all: circles, runes, lunar charts. But she focused on the basics: be at the clearing by midnight on the night of the eclipse, help maintain the circle of protection, ensure Liz's body was present so the spirit could rejoin it. Wait. Tina said, frowning. How do we bring Liz's body? The hospital won't allow me to just wheel her out. Rhett paused. We'll have to be discreet. If you can't officially check her out, we might have to resort to a less conventional approach. His tone suggested a plan that toed the line of legality, but time was running out. And Tina, desperate, didn't object. At last, they fell silent, the enormity of the task looming over them. Tina rubbed her arms, feeling the chill that seemed to emanate from the walls. She glanced at Rhett, seeing a flicker of empathy in his weary eyes. Thank you, she said quietly. I know you and Liz had your differences, but she always spoke of you with a strange respect, even when she was frustrated. A faint smile curved Rhett's lips. Liz is special, tenacious, inquisitive. I won't let her slip away. A burst of emotion clogged Tina's throat. She reached for Rhett's hand, squeezing it in a gesture of gratitude and solidarity. He seemed taken aback, but returned the squeeze. We have 3 nights, he repeated, releasing her hand. Prepare yourself. I'll finish fortifying my lab and gather the necessary items. You'll handle acquiring Liz's physical form. It's risky, but it's our only shot. Tina nodded, steeling herself for the challenge. She'd face any risk, any obstacle, to save Liz. Rising from her chair, she prepared to leave, her mind already racing with plans to slip Liz out of the hospital. She paused at the door, looking back at Rhett. Professor, she said softly, whatever it takes, let's bring her home. His gaze lingered on her, solemn, resolute. We will. With that, Tina stepped into the night, the pines rustling overhead like watchful giants. She clutched her keys, adrenaline fueling her resolve. The watchers might lurk in the shadows, but she wouldn't cower. Liz was counting on her. And as she drove back into town, the moon rose above the treetops, silver and distant, a silent herald of the cosmic struggle about to unfold. In the hush of her car, Tina whispered a promise. Hold on, Liz. I'm coming for you. 3 nights later, the sky bristled with tense energy as clouds drifted over a gibbous moon. The distant hush of Redwood Heights felt like the intake of breath before a thunderous storm. In the heart of the forest, Tina and Rhett stood in a broad clearing known among town legends as the Redwood Grove, a place where ancient trees circled a rocky knoll. Tonight, the gnarled roots and towering trunks would witness a battle between life and death, realm and rift. In the center of the clearing, an impromptu ritual space had been laid out. Tall candles flickered in a wide circle, their flames dancing in the light breeze. An array of crystals and drawn glyphs formed concentric patterns on the ground, pulsing faintly with energy. At the very center lay Liz's physical form, placed gently on a makeshift stretcher. Tina's hands still shook from smuggling her friend out of the hospital. But she refused to falter now. Time was short. This has to work, Tina whispered, her gaze on Liz's pale features. Wires and monitors were absent here. Only the dim glow of candles illuminated her friend's still face. Tina forced back tears, recalling memories of simpler times, exchanging class notes, sharing coffee, laughing about silly campus gossip. She prayed this night would allow them more memories yet to come. Rhett Dawson stood on the opposite side of the circle, garbed in a dark coat over rough attire. The amulet he had shown Liz days before hung around his neck, gleaming with unearthly light. His expression was grave, but resolute. The watchers had grown bolder since their first encounter in his home. He sensed their presence at the edges of the clearing, slithering between tree trunks like living shadows. Above, the moon slipped into partial eclipse, tinging its glow with an ominous red. The night air crackled. Tina felt a chill race down her spine as Rhett raised his arms, chanting in a low, sonorous voice. The language he spoke was old, carrying a cadence that made the candles flare. She stepped closer, forming a protective stance by Liz's side. What can I do? She called, her voice trembling in the swirling wind. Keep the circle intact, Rhett shouted over the rising gale. If anything breaches our perimeter, hold it off. Liz's spirit must complete the crossing. Tina gritted her teeth, adrenaline coursing through her veins. She clutched a pouch of protective salts and a small talisman Rhett had given her. It felt woefully inadequate, but she braced herself, determined. Meanwhile, on a plane just beyond human sight, Liz's spirit lingered close. She hovered above her motionless body, drawn by the amulet's luminous pull. The intangible threads tethering her to Rhett had guided her through the forest, a silent current that carried her across the boundary between worlds. Now, she sensed the Watchers gathering, pressing in. Their hunger was palpable, a black hole of malevolence. But Liz was no longer alone. She had Rhett, Tina, and the faint but resolute call of her own body drawing her home. Rhett's chant rose to a crescendo, the words like sparks, igniting the circle's latent power. The glyphs on the ground glowed brighter, lines of ethereal force converging on Liz's form. Candle flames grew tall and wild, throwing shadows that writhed like dancing specters. The amulet at Rhett's neck blazed with a brilliance that illuminated the entire clearing. Suddenly, movement in the trees. A half-dozen Watchers slid into view, their forms dark and featureless, eyes burning like distant stars. They circled the grove, hissing with unearthly voices. Tina felt an icy dread coiling in her belly, but she held her ground. She flung a handful of salt at the nearest Watcher, just as Rhett had instructed, and it recoiled with a sibilant shriek. Across the circle, Rhett extended one hand, channeling energy from the amulet into a radiant barrier. The Watchers battered against it, their shrieks rising in an ear-splitting cacophony. They wanted Liz's spirit, her essence. Trapped between life and death, was a banquet for them. But Rhett's barrier held. For now, Liz, suspended in a realm between mortal and astral, felt the Watchers pull like a vacuum seeking to tear her away. She fought it, focusing instead on the familiar shape of her own face, her body lying within the circle. With effort, she drifted closer, yearning to reunite with the flesh that had been hers. A swirl of memories flashed before her, the argument with Tina, the accident's harsh impact, the raw fear in Rhett's eyes when he first sensed her spirit. Guilt, love, and hope merged into a driving force. From the corner of her vision, she saw a Watcher slip past the barrier, using some cunning trick or weaker spot in the defense. It lunged, a writhing mass of darkness, aimed directly at Liz's body. Tina shouted. Diving forward to intercept, she swung the talisman, and for a moment, an arc of light emanated from it. The Watcher recoiled with a furious hiss, then renewed its assault. Tina's heart pounded. She was no warrior, yet she refused to yield. Summoning every ounce of courage, she hurled a second handful of salt while chanting a line Rhett had taught her. The Watcher reeled back, screeching in rage. Liz seized the opportunity. She slipped closer to her body, her spirit shimmering with determination. If she could just bridge those last few inches of separation. Outside the circle, Rhett redoubled his chant. The amulet pulsed like a blazing star, sending arcs of silver light lashing outward. Each arc struck a Watcher, briefly illuminating their hideous forms, amalgamations of writhing shadow and acidic malice. They shrieked and writhed under the onslaught, but more of them pressed forward, tearing at the edges of the protective circle. This is it, Liz, Tina whispered through gritted teeth, battling the wave of dread threatening to overwhelm her. Come back to us. At that moment, the moon reached the peak of its eclipse, turning the clearing into a surreal tableau of crimson light and dancing shadows. The glyphs on the ground flared with near-blinding luminescence. Rhett shouted a final word of power, voice echoing like thunder through the trees. The Watchers recoiled en masse, screaming as though the very air had scorched them. Liz felt an irresistible surge of energy blossom from the amulet, passing through Rhett's circle, into her body. She dived toward her own form, letting the momentum carry her spirit back where it belonged. Like slipping into a familiar coat, she felt the contours of her flesh, the weight of solid bone and muscle. For a split second, the Watcher's howls filled her mind. Then, a warm, all-encompassing darkness claimed her. In the clearing, a hush fell. The circle's glow subsided, leaving only the candle flames flickering in the night breeze. The Watchers slithered away, their shrieks fading into the far reaches of the forest. Tina knelt beside Liz, heart hammering. "Liz," she whispered, tears spilling over her cheeks. Rhett, breathless and trembling with exertion, dropped to his knees on the other side, pressing 2 fingers to Liz's neck, feeling for a pulse. He found it steady, warm, alive. Suddenly, Liz's eyelids fluttered. Her chest rose in a ragged breath. A soft moan escaped her lips, as though awakening from a deep, troubled slumber. Tina let out a choked sob of relief. She clutched Liz's hand, tears streaking her face. "Liz! Can you hear me?" Slowly, hazel eyes opened, dazed and unfocused. Liz gazed at Tina, recognition dawning like dawn's first light. "Tina," she croaked, her voice weak but unmistakably there. "Where?" Tina laughed through her tears, unable to form coherent words. Rhett closed his eyes, murmuring a prayer of thanks under his breath. The amulet around his neck still glowed faintly, as though savoring a final note of victory. Liz's gaze drifted to Rhett, confusion etched into her features. But in that moment, something passed between them, an unspoken understanding of the trials they had both endured. She reached out, and he clasped her hand gently, relief and gratitude shining in his eyes. For a long moment, they remained there, together in the glow of flickering candles and moonlight, the forest humming with a quiet sense of awe. The Watchers were gone, repelled by the circle's power and the fierce resolve of those defending Liz's life. The night air felt cleansed, as though a looming shadow had been banished from Redwood Heights. Eventually, Rhett helped Tina lift Liz onto her feet, supporting her trembling frame. "You'll need medical care," he said gently, "but you should recover fully now." Liz leaned against Tina, her limbs wobbly, her heart pounding with the exhilaration of being alive. She turned to Rhett, voice still weak. "Thank you," she managed, eyes brimming. "For everything." His smile was soft, the barriers of arrogance worn down by the trials of this night. "We did it together," he replied, glancing at Tina with genuine respect. "Now let's get you somewhere safe." The trio made their way out of the circle, stepping carefully among the guttering candles and cooling glyphs. The partial eclipse began to wane overhead, the moon shedding its blood-red hue to reveal a pale silver glow. In that returning light, the forest no longer looked menacing. Instead, it felt alive with possibility, as though Redwood Heights had witnessed a triumph of hope over darkness. Over the coming days, Liz stayed briefly in the hospital, under close observation. Doctors were astonished by her rapid improvement. Whatever intangible forces had bound her before were gone. Tina stayed by her side, tears of relief turning to laughter as she caught Liz up on everything that had transpired. Liz cried too, hugging Tina and begging forgiveness for the fight that seemed so trivial now. Rhett visited quietly, keeping his presence subdued. He offered guidance on how to ward off any lingering energies. But the Watchers had been thoroughly repelled, their links severed by the full moon's ritual. Liz sensed his cautious affection, an undercurrent that both intrigued and comforted her. When he finally departed, he left behind a handwritten note of instructions, simple measures, to ensure her continued safety. In the weeks that followed, life at Redwood Heights University resumed a semblance of normalcy. Tina and Liz found a new closeness, their friendship stronger than ever. Late at night, over coffee, they sometimes spoke in hushed tones about Watchers, cosmic rifts, and the near-death ordeal Liz had survived. And though they both carried scars, some seen, some unseen, the experience forged an unbreakable bond between them. As for Rhett Dawson, whispers circulated of a groundbreaking paper he was writing, something about dimensional anomalies and the interplay between myth and quantum mechanics. His lectures brimmed with renewed passion, though he never spoke openly of the Redwood Grove or the Watchers. Liz, however, often caught his eye during class, sharing a secret smile that spoke volumes about the world beyond textbooks. On a crisp morning, months after that fateful night, Liz found herself strolling through the campus gardens, the sun warm on her shoulders. She spotted Rhett leaning against a stone railing, gazing at the blossoms. Summoning courage, she approached, heart fluttering with gratitude and unspoken feelings. He turned, and a gentle warmth lit his eyes. "Liz," he greeted, voice surprisingly soft. "You look well." She smiled. "I feel well, thanks to you, and Tina, and everything that happened." She hesitated, searching for the right words. "I just wanted to say, thank you." Again. Rhett paused, then gave a slight incline of his head. "I'm glad you're safe." For a moment, they regarded each other, the weight of shared experiences lingering between them. Then Liz ventured a tentative question. "Think you'll ever do more research on that side of Redwood Heights? The Watchers, the Rifts?" His expression grew thoughtful. "Perhaps. But for now, I'm content knowing that some mysteries are best guarded, at least until the world is ready." Liz understood. Not all truths needed to be broadcast. Some belonged to the hush of candlelit groves, where life and death intersected under a crimson moon. She reached out, laying a hand on his arm. This time, there was no barrier of intangibility between them. Their eyes locked, and in that simple contact lay a promise of new beginnings, no longer bound by cosmic accidents, but by choice. A breeze carried the scent of blossoms, and Liz's heart soared. Whatever happened next, she would face it with open eyes and a soul newly awakened to life's fragile wonder. She thought of Tina, the Watchers, the harrowing night under the eclipsed moon. She thought of the accident that had nearly claimed her, and she thought of Rhett Dawson, her infuriating, brilliant, alpha presence, who had saved her in more ways than one. As she slipped her hand into his, she knew there would be challenges ahead, but also joys unimaginable. No longer a ghost, no longer confined to whispered pleas in a spectral realm. Liz Monroe walked in the sunshine breathing, laughing, loving, and prepared to embrace the future. And in that moment, beneath the bright blue sky, their story found a happy horizon, where shadows fell behind them and the light of possibility shimmered on the path ahead.